to the second day of the conference. Thank you all to be here. We will start with the presentation of Gustavo Ruiz da Silva of the Pontifical Catholic University of Sao Paulo. And then we have the comments of Donovan Hernández of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Gustavo, you have 30 minutes for your presentation, and then Donovan has 15 minutes for his comments. Gustavo, you can start.
Hola, buenos días. Es con gran placer que hoy presente esta conferencia sobre Foucault y Yugoslavia. Sin embargo, como pueden ver por mi acento, yo no soy hispanohablante, yo soy de Brasil. Entonces, yo preparé una presentación para ustedes en inglés. Espero que esté bien para todos. So we're going to continue talking in English now. So my presentation is called Foucault and War, Yugoslavia through Foucault and Deleuze. So I actually started this research some years ago while I was studying in France. I had a class with a very nice teacher about national identities in Yugoslavia. So I had this idea of preparing a paper that I published in Brazil, making this relationship between Yugoslavian national identities and football. Well, football is quite a big deal in Brazil, and I hope it is in Mexico as well. So actually I started this relation between football in Yugoslavia and Foucault theory to think about identity. So we're going to start talking about it and make a conceptualization about it. So identity, according to my paper, it's linked to recognition, theories and explanations that seek to combine the relationship between the subject and a collective meaning. So this notion has been traditionally understood as a fixed category, being either a material or mental substance. So it has like this double standard, like it's a double thing. So differently to Foucault, it's not a grounded substance. And I'm talking about it according to Johann Oxala, this very nice teacher from the University of Chicago. So according to her, Foucault is not a grounded substance, but a dynamic and historical relation, the national identity. It's not a metaphysical thing. Rather, it's a collection of qualities that is important to the culture. It's a political notion that concerns a power relation that builds historically and culturally subjectivities and changing practices. So identity is a construct in which the subject makes itself in relation to others. It's always something that is happening all the time and it's always changing. So concerning the Eastern Europe, with the dismantling of the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, it was a matter of time before conflicts arise in the Balkans. The reconstruction of their identities that actually traces back for a long time ago, it's always being created, considering the exclusion of an identity that has once been suppressed by the Yugoslav state, actually by the dictator Tito. So several artifices has been used for the construction of the national identity there. And it actually happens concerning some symbolical signs, some symbolical aspects of the culture. Thus, the identity formation can be made by a socially constructed symbolic representation. And this representation is always incorporating some practice of significations and symbolic systems in which meanings are producing and guiding subjects. So when you think about identity, like especially national identities, it is a relation between agents, like social individuals, and structures, in which structures are being predisposed to functions as structuring structures, Well, you can read here. The important thing is this principle generates and organizes practices and representations, because we have the agent and the structure, and they're both changing each other. So it's an intersubjective meanings being composed, not only aggregating some interpretations of the word, but some collective knowledge that is being shared to those capable of influencing practices and social realities. So emphasizing the importance of this intersubjectivities and comprehending the social practices, when you think about the agent interpretation of their social reality, it's important to think that identity is always something being created in history, changing through the culture of the society. So here we have some pictures, because I'm gonna talk about like some philosophy stuff now. We have Foucault here and Clausewitz. So according to Clausewitz, I want to get like, where's the relation? I know there is a jump, but according to Clausewitz, war is merely the continuation of a policy by other means. So its theory should be close to the soil of experience. It's something in the ground. That's actually something that comes to Foucault, and it's quite interesting. Oh, something's what? Okay. Someone sent something in the chat, but something. So concerning Foucault's theory, the study of power, differently from Clausewitz, should be used as a metaphor, using warlike vocabularies to distance itself from metaphysics. Because in Foucauldian theory, when we think about power, we should think about it as a combat, as a strategy. So power should not be a study based on victory or defeat, rather in a relation with itself. Power as a perpetual battle rather than a contract regulating transaction or conquests. In this genealogical register of analysis, we can be sorry. Oh God. Sorry, I'm fine. In this genealogical register of analysis, work can be summarized in the word agonism. And agonism means combat, struggle, or reciprocal incitation and confrontation. So to Foucault, there is no ultimate power, but rather a pool of implied relationships of strategies, provocation, confrontations, and politics are just the continuation of war by other means. Thus, Clausewitz and Foucault occupy opposite sides of concerning theories of war and politics, because they're quite the opposite. So they kind of have a similar approach to power, because both try to connect it to the ground of experience. They don't operate in the metaphysical field. However, they occupy opposite sides of interpretation. So Foucault is kind of inverting Clausewitz. So when thinking about that, we can use this grid of analysis to think about the Balkans. So what is the Balkans? Balkans is an ethnically and religiously heteronymous areas with large cultural differences, but also countless similarities in terms of folklore customs, mentalities, characters, and historical pasts. So it is a region that is located in Europe between the Adriatic, Ionian, Aegean, and Black Seas, and is usually associated with the former Yugoslavia. So it is quite interesting because there is a geographical debate about it, like where is the Balkans? But besides that, it's important to think that there are several stereotypes in the Western imagination about the Balkans, but it is always changing with the integration with the European Union. So here we have some maps about it. The small one on the left, it's the actual Balkans when you think about it geographically. But here we have the Yugoslavia map, like the green thing on the right, and the former Yugoslavian states here. So we have like Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, and so on. Where's the football? So the game, actually. Let's start with the concept of game. So the game contains some elements that can serve as vectors of aggression. It's surrounded by an aesthetic of violence that has been appropriated by some different political, economical, and cultural interests, internally and externally to the state, some states, actually. So it's common for the nation to appropriate the game as a sport, as a coercive mechanism of the social constitution. So the national state is always using some aspects of the game to build itself as a national identity. Thus, it is possible to perceive the use of media in the sports diffusion to make it a factor of constitution of a national identity. In the last century, especially, it comes to a fundamental characteristic of the nationalities of those people. Especially in the ancient Yugoslavia, war and this identity, national identities that has always been made, has been shaped by the feelings of the abhorrence exhibited in these Balkans countries. Because after Tito's death, there is some tension there, let's say about it. So it was reflected in football, this always conflicted participation in the social sphere. So influencing the memory of the region and reconfiguring its political, geographical, and cultural reminiscence aspects. It was a mirror of a relationship between war and the sport in the ancient Yugoslavia that shaped this new identity after the end of the Yugoslavian states. So always remembering that identities are always changing. There, after the Balkans War, they started to create a new one, like new identity for each one of the countries through sports, how to differentiate themselves through sports. So football and the effect it had in the Balkan is unfailing involved. They changed and get changed all the time through the expression of violence, especially in the 70s and the 80s. Yugoslavia's football ground field became a popular place for nationalist recruitment. So during the Yugoslavia stadium, the ground field of the football itself, especially concerning the organized cheering groups, the national identity emerged from those organized cheering groups in the football field. So in the 80s, when Tito died, they left a lot of nationalist groups behind, and they used those organized groups and the football image to go on with their own ends, especially concerning the new identities that were being created, like in the Croatia, Bosnia, and so on. So we have two images. Here we have like the Red Star Belgrade, the football team, and in the left we have the parastatal militarized group. It was like a urban kind of war group. Yes, it was like the Tigers of Serbia. So you have here on the right, they always walking with a small tiger because they were called like the tigers of Serbia. And in the left, we have the Red Star Belgrade, the football team. And the interesting part is that the physical discipline of the para-state group happened using a mask of football training. So they're like training the soldiers using these undertext of football training. And so here, nationalists used football to further perpetuate the violence happening there after the war. So they could use it as a strength to their own power after the crumbling of the Yugoslavia state. So following the dissolution of the Tito state, the stability of the Western Balkan became an important goal to the European Union. And so we have, for example, Croatia integrating now the European Union, some other states as well, trying to enter the European Union. So it was a goal to the economic group to contribute to the region's stability and good governance with like democratic values, principles, and etc. So a per-state group in urban areas was not like a very nice thing to happen. So they re-enter the state, the stadium, to perpetuate the political violence. So as an examination of the Balkan War should consider the reconstitution of the identity. But to do so, we need to think about football, because several initiatives were taken by different football players, because the football players helped to rebuild a social routine about the identity, because they recreated some social normality. And as I said, for example, some physical discipline started to be made through the football and the masculine groups there. It was a path of symbolic and ritualized violence in the match, in the stadium, leading those young men through war songs. They created like folkloric songs through the stadium to differentiate themselves from other groups, like what is to be a Bosnian, what is to be a Croatian, a Serbian. And it happened through Orient songs they used to sing in the stadiums of football. So the match was a training ground for war. They disciplined and rehearsed songs that are being adapted and picked up as they're on the battlefield. So football used as a path to the violence, war, and nationalism. So its agent and supporters were parties of the war, living an extreme politicization and political violence of the society through the football field. As I said, it was an ideological conditioning through the physical training. I don't know if you had like access of my paper. They have like specific phrases and songs they used to sing there concerning football, but it was actually an ideological thing, like to perpetuate Serbian and cultural stuff and etc. So it required a prior ideological commitment to the field, like to the football. It was not only motivated by heroism, honor, this idea of homeland, like I'm from Serbia, like my motherland, but rather by profit, because with the stadium, it came with the, well, capitalism. So there are a lot of money involved as well with those groups and how they used to enter like the stadium. So the word of football contributed to the awareness raising of the nationalistic cause there. And the stadium served to promote this exaltation of national identities and always putting the other side as the other, like the one who should be violented. So the use of violence there emerged through the stadium of football because they could not maintain the state of war, like a literal war with tanks and etc. So here you can see the mess there was after the crumbling of the Yugoslavian state. You have some ethnical mixture there. So it was a problem, but how to differentiate each other? It happened through the football stadium. So we have some final considerations, like war can be seen as politics, violence, and brutalities. Yes, it can. However, it can also be interpreted, according to Foucault and Nietzsche, as an exercise, as a game. So in the 80s, football supporters used to sing as a way to support their ideology and nationalism. So civilian violence increased, especially inside football fields, but the football fields were being used as a stage for the expression of their identity and violence. And it continued outward, spreading through Central Yugoslavia as a combat, as a conflict between ethnicities there. And football in its supporter subculture shifted the general analysis of the Balkan identities. And it happened through the game of the football and the Yugoslavian war. So to Foucault, politics that can manage peace and order should be seen next to the operation of power, especially concerning its effects on the population. So football, it is a rapport, like this special type of relationship with politics and war, should be analyzed as part of the Balkanic identity. All three, like politics, war, and football, represent categories that work as one there, because they all operate inside of this national agonism, like how to differentiate their ethnicities. So the being subjectivities there is being created by this tension, even with the institutional support gave by the European Union in the Balkans to maintain peace, democratic values, and etc. The war has happened through some cultural aspects. It has never ended, really. It floated through other means. So we can think about football as an agonistic movement producing a self-collective image of those people because they see themselves in a specific way concerning their differences, but their differences were created through the stadiums of football. So we should think when analyzing the Balkan area and their specific national identities, we should think it as a tension that has never ended for real, but floated through other means, floated through cultural aspects. So we should think football as a mask of this agonistic movement, producing how people see themselves and how they produce a different subjectivities through this tension of war and football. And I guess that's it. I have like 1 minute left, but thank you everybody. Muchas gracias a todos. Esa es mi presentación. Espero que mi acento no es tan malo. Muchas gracias nuevamente. No sé, las preguntas tienen alguna.
Thank you, Gustavo. We have now the comments of Donovan Hernández. Please, Donovan, you can start.
Well, thanks for this invitation. This is the first time I speak in English in public, so I apologize for all my grammatical mistakes. Then I wrote these few notes. Let me read them. Well, that's it. Gustavo's paper offers an interesting overview of two issues that are not usual in approaches to contemporary philosophy: Foucault and sport. To be more precise, it is about analyzing soccer as identity formation in the former Yugoslavia from Foucault's analysis of power. At first sight, it is strange, at least singular, insofar as Foucault never dealt seriously with sport, with the athletic body, which is more oriented towards competition and sporting contest than to the discipline of work, the development of skills for production, or subjected subjectivities. In contrast, Foucault did develop an analysis of power based on the model of war, inverting Clausewitz's famous aphorism that war is the continuation of politics by other means. It was, at least between 1970 and 1976, about thinking power based on tactics and strategies, on the model of combat and devices. At first glance, it doesn't seem to be a relation between this analysis of the technologies of power, their application on the body, and the production of docile subjects, and sport considered as the formation of social identity. But Gustavo's work puts us in the context of the violent separation of Yugoslavia, of the emergence of ethnical grudges and millenary histories that, adapted in the key of modern nationalism, led, among other things, to the tragic outbreak of the Balkans. In this sense, I wonder if approaches such as those of Hans Ulrich Gumbrecht on the athletic body, or Linda Alcoff and her phenomenology hermeneutic of visible identities, and even the works of Wolfgang Sowski on violence, would be of more use to these theses. The advantage of Gustavo's work, I think, lies in the fact that he explores the expression of conflict rather than its causes in athletic identifications. In this respect, the relationship between soccer and politics is as long as you can imagine. We can think of the Argentine dictatorship of Videla and the goal scored by El Pelusa Maradona against England in the middle of the Falklands War in the 70s. We can also think of Uruguay, the first world champion, and the dictatorship of the Southern Cone. Examples of anti-fascist struggle have also been present in soccer. It is enough to remember Socrates, not the philosopher, but the Brazilian soccer player, Socrates de Souza, the protest position of Maradona, popular and plebeian hero, and even Poppy Zanetti calling a match to donate resources to the EZLN. The truth is that more than Foucault's approaches to power, I think that cultural studies could give a better framework to Gustavo's approach, since it is about linking cultural representation of identities, in this case, with power. We should not forget that, after all, Foucault doesn't have a political theory, and he didn't deal very often with the countries of the so-called real socialism. Certainly, Foucault would die before the Soviet bloc and the tensions in Eastern Europe manifested themselves violently in the early 1990s. We should also bear in mind that the war model was not the only approach to power elaborated by Foucault. It will be worth considering his studies on governmentality, the exercise of power through the economy, what the Frenchman called the production of freedom in Western countries, and the specific relationship between the arts of government and the practices of freedom in American and European liberalism. Foucault's critique is more directed towards the practices of desubjection, than towards the social mechanisms of identification. I think that Gustavo's work is better sheltered by these studies on symbolic identity in the post-war period and will gain more strength if it were to move methodologically towards approaches such as those of Benedict Anderson in his Imagined Communities or Michael Taussig in The Magic of the State. After all, with this comment I close, Foucault paid less attention to the symbolic mechanisms of language, which are certainly the focus of Jacques Lacan psychoanalysis, for example, than to the rules of knowledge formation. In any case, it is encouraging to explore works that move the authors from their limits, knowing that their approaches do not always allow us to account for all social phenomena. Thank you.
Thank you, Donovan. Gustavo, if you want to say something about the comments of Donovan?
Well, I do have a few comments. I think the first one, it's that I couldn't say that I intend to give a final interpretation about this phenomena. However, when thinking about my proposition, I could say that it was more about experiencing a possible analysis, like how to experience a gesture of interpretation. Like, how could I possibly use in a possible scenario Foucaultian grind of analysis, a possible methodological approach to one specific point of a phenomena. So I don't think it was intended to promote a final analysis, like analysis grounded to the experience itself, trying to say something final about it, but rather a philosophical experience of saying something. It was more of a heuristic experience, like a possible strategic solution through a possible methodological experience. So it was more of a, how could one say something different about the Balkans and give some contribution through the field, more of a final analysis about it. So it is quite usual to think about politics and football in Latin America. Well, we have Brazilian winning the World Cup in the middle of a dictatorship, and our dictator here using it as a way to promote itself to the society. It happens as well in Argentina and other countries. However, it's not usual to think about football in the Yugoslavian states, especially because in some countries there, football is not the main game. So noticing that there is something happening there in the football stadium, in the field, and some kind of cultural thing happening between the militarization of the society and the football game, it's something to be noticed, and something that hasn't been noticed in the literature. Only some like vague comments on it. So it was more about how could I produce some comments strategically seen in the middle of the debate on the Yugoslavia society, and giving some possible approaches using a different methodological idea to the problem, rather than giving a final and more how can I say, like a better solution to the problem, like a good analysis or something. It was more of a philosophical gesture, an heuristic strategic gesture to the Yugoslavian studies. So I think it was quite different, the final intention of the research, but I do see that there is more to say about it, and some other theoretical approaches should be more useful to the problem. But I don't think that's the final thing. Like, I don't think that's the case. It was more of how could I use something different to give some new proposition about it, a possible analysis, and how could I use this one specific possible analysis to highlight a different thing, specifically in a society that doesn't see like football as a thing directly connected to politics, like we do in Latin America. So when thinking about it, I do think the paper gives something new to the problem. And well, I guess that's it. Like, it's a possible vision on the paper. So, but however, thank you, Donovan. And it was really nice. And I agree with you. Like, there are other approaches. There are better to the problem, but giving some other point of view about the problem to highlight a possible relationship that is not usually highlighted, it was more of something that I intended with the paper. I guess that's it. Are there other questions or something?
Okay, thank you. If you have a question, raise your hands in Zoom or in your homes, or write the question in the chat, please. Johan, please.
Thanks, Luis. Gustavo, good morning, and your speech was very interesting. I found a very good philosophical exercise. I think I have a comment and a question. The comment is, I'm from Colombia, and here in Mexico, the football emotion is not like in South America, in Argentina, for example, in Argentina or Brazil or Colombia is quite different from here in Mexico. And this follows to the question that I have, and is if do you think that that, for example, violence and discrimination is inherent to the football, because for example, appeals to a fight between identities or between subjectivities. For example, here in Mexico, football is always a big problem, or is a thing that people watch because, for example, I don't know if you know that here in Mexico, when the goalkeeper kick the ball, all the people shoot puto. That puto means here, a reference to the homosexual people. And this was a very big problem, and in the World Cup it was a very big problem because all Mexican people shoot puto. And I saw that this is an expression of this conflict between identities, because football watchers are men, and the players are men, and homosexual is a kind of, I think is a representation of that you are not strong. And I saw that this is because, for example, football, as you said, is an expression of identity, and is a violence game. And my question is, if you think that this is inherent to the football because it confronts identities, or do you think that is like you said in the Foucault, it depends on the context, depends on the kind of society in which the football plays. I don't know, what do you think about that? Thank you.
Okay, I'll keep the idea of football so I can talk about it later. But I guess I'll start with this anthropological idea of game. Because when you think about the game is something that produces difference. Because we start the game as equals, but we end the game with a winner and a loser. And so I think there is, in this concept of game, like the anthropological experience of game, some inherent aspects of violence. But that doesn't mean that the violence is inherent to the game. I think some aspects of violence, it's connected to the idea of game. Especially because there is tension between the players. It can be like a good tension, it's fine. Can be like a ludicrous thing, but I think like when specifically concerning football, especially football in the last century, like 20th century, violence is something very close to the experience of the football game. And I do think it happens because some bodies are marginalized when concerning football, especially those bodies connected to the feminine. So I don't think that is a marginalization of specific bodies, but rather than an experience of the feminine, because it's a specific type of marginalization, like gay people and women as well is always being marginalized in football. But I don't think that the violence needs to be physically connected to football. I don't know if I'm making myself clear about it, because it's not a need, it's not something, an experience that has to be there. But rather it is happening right now, the marginalization of some people. But there is one register of problem. The other one is the idea of game. When I think of game as a register of anthropological analysis, I do think there is some violence involving the concept of game, but it's a different kind of violence because it's a violence that is actually producing difference between the players. There is this agonism tension there because the agents are trying to differentiate themselves from each other because we start the game as equals, but we end the game as different. So there is a tension there involving the agents. But I guess that's one thing. Another thing is how we experience football nowadays, especially concerning the marginalization of the femininity. Because, well, I think we all agree on that. Football is a very masculine thing. And it can be quite violent. It usually gets violent. In Brazil, we have like this huge problem as well concerning organized cheering groups. So, well, I think no one could say the opposite. Like football nowadays, it's quite violent, and it does marginalize everything connected to the feminine. But I think that's one field of analysis. The other field of analysis is the political and conceptual violence concerning the concept of game, like the anthropological experience. That's one thing. The other thing is what we're seeing nowadays. Concerning football, like the actual game we have, well, it's sad, the situation, obviously, and I do think it can change through time. because everything can change through times, but for a long time it has been this way. So I do think we have this crystallized, like this very deep relationship between football, violence, and the marginalization of some bodies. I don't know, did I make myself clear? It was...
Sorry. Yeah. I understand your points and found them very interesting and also very problematic. But it's very good. But for example, I question myself about this thing that you say about this anthropological concept of game. But for example, Wittgenstein puts that the game is not only a confrontations between people. You can play yourself, you can play with a ball, and there is no difference, there is no winners, no losers. And I don't know if your definition of anthropological game is very Hobbesian, I don't know how to say that, but Hobbesian conception of the game. Because I think that there is a lot of games that is not winners, not losers, not, I don't know, confrontation. And the other thing that I thought is in this point of the exclusion of feminine. I don't know if what do you say if I can tell you that the solution is football, feminine football? Do you think that this is the solution to this problem? To make a World Cup of football, of women football, professional league of women football. What do you think about that also? Okay, I saw that there is no more questions, so I think that I can ask you this. Thanks.
I do think I should let Afra ask me first.
Yes, please, Afra.
I have two comments. Well, one is a comment, the other one is a petition. First, it is nice that you said football instead of soccer, first of all. Second, a short petition. I would like to know if you could dig a little deeper into the army discipline and football discipline and how this is important to the creation of national identity.
Yeah, it came to mind when I was writing the paper. Like, should I use soccer or should I use football? But soccer is too American for me, so I rather something different. I don't know if there is anyone here from the United States.
Sorry, I'm
sorry.
too Mexican.
So yeah, soccer was like too United Stadium for me. I rather use football. So the question about the, can you repeat the question, please? I think I should pay attention like to the terms, not just the idea.
My interest remains in what is the relation between army discipline and or the Navy discipline and the football discipline in the construction of a national identity.
You mean like specifically in Yugoslavia, or like everywhere?
Specifically in Yugoslavia.
Okay. So in the 80s, like in the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s, some tension happens to be created in the football field, like in the football stadium. But I think it got to a different point, like a more violent point, when Tito died there. After Tito died, the Yugoslavian state started to crumble, like fall apart. And national identities start to pop like everywhere, especially because the ethnical like the division is not as clear as the national division of the national state. So they different themselves through the football teams. And the national groups, the militarized groups there, they used almost an excuse to group themselves through the football teams. So there happens to be like physical training through the cheering groups. Like, oh, we're here training through the para-state group, armored through the Civil War. But we are always saying like, no, we are just a group of friends training to football. We are practicing these ideological songs, but actually it's just like a cheering song for the game, and etc. So it was almost like a mask of the war preparation, the football. So like the expression of the military tension happens in the field and through the cheering groups, the football cheering groups. So it was quite something there, because when we analyze, used to be two different things. One group is a paramilitary group ready to the Civil War, and something else is happening there, like, oh, there's people in the stadium. However, it's actually the same people. Like the organized cheering group there in the stadium, singing songs to their national team, is actually the same para-state group preparing to the Civil War. And in the street, like in the social living experience, they use the cheering group to the football stadium as a mask to the preparation of the Civil War. So, for example, when I put like the two images there, like the Red Star of Belgrade and the Tigers of Serbia, they're actually happening at the same time, because they're exchanging like experiences and agents at the same time. So it was something happening there. Like the cheering group was a mask of experience to the training. So like, oh, we're not training as a paramilitary group. We are here just training football. Yes, and we are making like exercise and flexions and etc. Like I'm terrible with physical terms and etc. But we're like, you're training, but that's just like sport. We're just friends. But actually was training to the para-state group. So it was quite something, and especially concerning the ideological aspect of it, more than a physical training. It happens there, yes. Some commenters and some authors noticed that the physical discipline happens in the military paramilitary group as an expression of the cheering group there. However, it was more of an ideological thing, because the same songs they used to sing on the stadium were those used to animate like the people, like to make them engage in the ethnical distinction during the war. So I think that's it.
Yes. Thank you, Gustavo.
We have 1 minute for last question, if you want to answer, Gustavo. It's from Donovan. Donovan, please be quick.
Well, there's this, when we think about sport and football, we think immediately on war. But there are two processes of peace construction and sport, and even football. Now, Roger Magazine from the Universidad Iberoamericana has a lot of work about that. No? Then I think that it could be of use to you. And well, yes, we agree. You don't give a final interpretation because you can't. I mean, there is not such of these things. I mean, methodologically, Foucault and Deleuze doesn't work in these terms. But I do see a lot of sociological information about Yugoslavian sport and football, even war and masculinity maybe. But I don't see a lot of Foucault or Deleuze in your work. And then I think you could use other tools that could help. Even with this visual work, maybe the visual studies could be of use, and the work of Anne Fausto Sterling, that he thinks about sport as a gender regulation, maybe. Then I do see a lot of valuable information on your work that is more sociological than philosophical. But I think that I don't see anything new on Foucault's terms or Deleuzian terms. I think you must work on that because you think about these identification processes, but Deleuze and Foucault don't think much about these social identities, maybe. And maybe you need work much, maybe you could use a lot of works that makes valuable approaches on symbolic relationships like Pierre Bourdieu or something else. I mean, and that will be my last comment. Thank you.
I do think someone else raised the hand here, but I don't think we have time anymore.
We are under time, but if you want to respond to Donovan, it's okay.
Well, oh God, I do have another appointment now, but well, I want to thank you, Donovan, and I'm sure you're going to keep it in mind. Surely, every contribution is important, sure. But yeah, well, I couldn't deny, because I think most of my paper is anchored on sociological and anthropological interpretations rather than philosophical ones. That's for sure. Especially because my first bachelor is in social science, and only after that I started to study philosophy. So yes, most of my research is grounded on, well, I'm kind of opening the game here, like putting all the cards on the table. So most of my paper is actually, okay, there is a very Foucaultian thing there, and I do stand with that. Not only Foucaultian, but I do think like the background of Foucault used there is a Nietzschean approach, especially when in the final considerations, I start using Bataille's reading of Nietzsche and how Nietzsche interprets war as a game. However, I do think as well that a very strong background of my paper is based on Bourdieu, especially concerning the relationship between agents and structures. So it was a game of chiaroscuro, like talking about Foucault, but actually inserting anthropological experiments into philosophy. However, I do keep the idea that it was more of a possible analysis, like how could I use some structuralistics and post-structuralistics analysis to highlight something that almost hadn't until then been to light in Yugoslavian studies, especially concerning what I answered to Afra, for example, like this undertone connection between Turing groups and parastate groups. But yeah, concerning like the writing of the paper, I do think that there is a hiding background concerning anthropological and sociological studies, especially Pierre Bourdieu. Yes, well, I can't deny that. Yeah, it's quite interesting that you noticed though, because I think there is only one like indirect quotation of Bourdieu there, but most of the analysis is based on Pierre Bourdieu. But yet I do think like the main theoretical grid of analysis is this concept that Bataille highlights on Nietzsche, that is the idea of war as a game, as another aspect of war, not only as politics, but the idea that politics is a continuation aspect of war. So when we think about politics, especially this cultural aspect there in the Balkans, is actually an extension of the civil war happening through the stadiums of football. And I think that's the main achievement of the paper, because it is contributing with this relationship between the cheering groups inside the stadiums and the continuation of the parastate groups emerging after the crumbling of the Yugoslavia state. But I guess that's it. We're kind of late already.
Okay, thank you, Gustavo, for your talk. We are on the time, over the time, so thank you.
Muchas gracias a todos. Perdón por mi acento nuevamente. Buenas tardes a todos. Adiós.
Hasta luego.
Hasta luego.